If you can find a seat, those who are still standing, but you're welcome to stand as well, totally up to you. Before we let Phil get started, I just want to make an announcement, and I'm very sorry about this, but unfortunately, we just heard at the last minute that Joe Salazar will not make it, right?
He's okay, there's no health issue, it's just a scheduling snafu issue.
Yeah, so, and when I found out just recently, I gave a courtesy call to Phil, and Phil was very generous to say, Michael, still have the meeting, we really like what Douglas County is doing, so
I said I love what Douglas County is doing. I said Douglas County is the most important county in the state to swing the state blue.
Woo!
Yeah. And I said that Michael's leadership and family, he's got his whole family here, is so inspiring to me, there's no way I would miss it. That's what I actually said.
So what we're going to do, because Phil was so generous, is we originally were planning on, we've got Betty Davis and David Crystal and myself doing the panel, and we were going to ask questions to both candidates, but since Phil's here, what we're thinking of doing is we'll still ask questions, but we're going to allow, when we're in a particular subject area, for the audience to ask questions as well, which we weren't going to plan. We weren't planning before. So I know some of you came in and asked questions, and so I think it's a great way to, I know Phil really likes interacting with the audience, so we're going to do that. And we don't really need to worry about time of questions and all that kind of stuff. So.
And I'll stay later, even after the formal program, till everyone's questions are answered. So
why don't we do this? Phil, why don't you take a few minutes to do your opening statement, and then we'll get started.
Thank you all. I am super impressed with Douglas County. The best experience I had during the county assembly was at Douglas County. I was a little worried because you were having a little bit of a point of order discussion before I spoke. But it only underscored how passionate you are, how committed you are for fighting for the values of the Democratic Party and for our democracy. And 2018 is going to be a year that people are going to look back decades from now, and they're going to ask, what were you doing in 2018 to get our nation back on track? I'm here with you, because I believe together we can make Colorado a model for the nation. And the values that we hold dear around freedom and opportunity, around protecting our land, air, and water, are values that are all in the balance in 2018. And I'm optimistic because I see your energy, and it charges me up. And I'm optimistic because my family history is one of resilience and of overcoming challenges. As some of you know, my mom was born on April 13th, 1945, in a concentration camp in Nazi Germany. The next day, the U.S. Army liberated my mom. And last week, I was with a group where someone came up and said, my dad was there liberating Buchenwald, and it changed his life. That's the America that I know, the America whose commitment to freedom and opportunity will not be stopped. I've lived this classic American story, feeling this deep commitment to our country. It's called me to law school, working with Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the Supreme Court, President Barack Obama in the Justice Department White House, and being the dean of CU Law School during a difficult time, when we were able to really defy some national trends. In this moment, I want to be your Attorney General. I want to work with you on a range of critical issues to our state and bring innovative and collaborative leadership, because we don't need more political games in the Attorney General's office. That's what Cynthia Kaufman's about, and as you know well, that's what George Brockler would be about. We can't let that happen. This is not an easy campaign to win. Since 1982, only one Democrat has won, Ken Salazar. I want to change it, and with your help, we will. Thank you for being engaged. I look forward to all your questions. It's really important to me that all of you get all the questions answered, whatever hard questions you have, friends of yours has, because I need you to be able to talk to other people about why this job matters and why I'm the right person to do it. That's how we're going to win against some pretty tough odds. I mentioned history. Here's the other fact. George Brockler is not going to be raising a lot of money to run his own campaign. He's going to rely on this dark money group called the Republican Attorney General's Association. They'll have $5 million, and they're going to spend that trying to defame me. But if you all get to know me and others get to know me, we're going to win this race, because people can trust and work with other people more than BS cynical TV ads.
Great. Thank you, Phil. So what our plan is we have particular subject areas that we want to cover. And the first one we're going to start off with is civil rights, and Betty Davis will ask the first question.
Okay, here we go, Phil. So the owner of Masterpiece Cake Shop, as you probably know, citing his religious beliefs, refused to create a wedding cake for a same-sex couple. And now it's before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is scheduled, their ruling is scheduled for release in June. So if the Supreme Court rules in favor of the baker, how would you ensure, or what steps would you take to ensure, not only for the gay community, but for others, so that everybody receives equal service in business?
I'm really glad you asked about that important case. Let me quickly note, when I announced my campaign, I gave my first speeches in Pueblo and Colorado Springs, and in Colorado Springs my son raised his hand and said, and he was with me in this Napoleon plan, and said, Daddy, in Texas, they've passed a law that would not allow some people to adopt based on their religion. What would you do if that was here in Colorado? And that goes against these core civil rights. And what the theory is in this case, which could win, you're right, it's not clear that we're going to win this. The theory is people have a First Amendment right to discriminate. So the baker would say, I'm using my artistic talents, and I need to be able to use them only for people who I feel comfortable with. And that, if allowed, to undermine all sorts of civil rights protections, not just for gays and lesbians, but for other religions or people of color. What I would do is I would work to narrow that decision to the strictest limits I could possibly come up with. This is an important point about the Attorney General. You're the chief law enforcement and lawyer for the state. You have to interpret the law in a way that you believe mirrors justice, common sense, and what our Constitution is about. We are bound by the Supreme Court. So if the ruling is the baker has the right, then we have to acknowledge that, but we don't have to take that principle and run roughshod over all civil rights protections. I would look to give it the most narrow reading I could, and I'd look to overturn it at the first chance I could. It's worth noting our Supreme Court has gotten more conservative, and there's a bunch of rulings I want to overturn. Citizens United is high on the list. I talked about dark money. I recognize it's going to take some changes in the Constitution to do that, but I'm going to be playing a long game here because we're fighting for our view of what the Constitution represents, and if the current Supreme Court doesn't follow that, I will play the long game and seek to fight for what I believe in. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does.
David, you want to?
Yeah. So hate crimes are on the rise against Muslims and other minority groups. What measures would you take as Attorney General to interfere and block that type of behavior, both in the public sector and also under your responsibilities in the criminal sector as it relates to police, sheriffs, etc.? And have you met with the Muslim community and other minority communities leaders at this point in time to get a sense of their concerns and issues and how you hope to address it as Attorney General?
If Ghazala doesn't mind, I'll tell a story about a prior visit with the Casa Rakans. She, everyone knows Ghazala in the back, she said to me outside, she said, Phil, I'm a Muslim, and I need to ask you something. We're afraid now of rising levels of hate, and what I need to know is, are you with us? And I said, absolutely, and we're going to work on arranging a visit with her imam. I've been to the Sikh temple as well, which, as many people know, Sikhs are constantly being mistreated, often being asked to take off their turbans and generally racially profiled. We are living in a scary moment, and it is shocking and awful that the President of the United States is willing to say there's such a thing as good Nazis. The Charlottesville moment ranks high on the list of moments where I say, I can't believe this has happened. 2018, United States of America. There are no such thing as good Nazis or Ku Klux Klan. And there's no reason we can allow hatred to stew. It was another poignant moment when I went to Dolores County, and people said, our president stirred up a lot of hatred. We here in Colorado need to be our very best, which is what Ralph Carr represented during World War II. When he said, I refuse to intern Japanese Americans because of their ethnicity. And he set a climate and a tone of inclusivity. First and foremost, I will do everything I can to stand up for that tone, reassuring communities who are worried, whoever they are, that we will not allow or tolerate hatred, hate speech, and a climate of fear. Second, with respect to private activity where there is criminal sanctions, we need to enforce hate speech, which allows for additional penalties on top of the underlying crime, as a way to make clear that we don't tolerate that behavior. And third, as you noted, we have to make sure we're training law enforcement so that implicit bias that can often lead people to treat Muslims differently or African Americans differently doesn't drive their action. And when Ken Salazar was Attorney General, he set up in our Attorney General's office a peace officer standards and training program to teach people about implicit bias, to make it less likely that they'd be inclined to pull over someone by the color of their skin, and also to teach people not to escalate situations so we end up in violence, as we've often seen. And I want to work with all leaders in Colorado to set as clear a tone, best practice in how we treat people in employment and other settings. I've talked about a commitment to a Deputy AG for diversity and inclusiveness, to make the Attorney General's office a model for diversity and inclusion, and to challenge other businesses to best practice. We here in Colorado need to do our best to resist the rhetoric that we're seeing from our president and other quarters. I believe we can do that, and I still believe in what Martin Luther King said about our nation, which is the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice.
Okay.
The state of Colorado.
You guys can clap too, that's all right.
The state of Colorado, I read recently, is ranked 10th in terms of numbers of hate groups. What would you do as the AG to start breaking those down and getting rid of them?
We need to keep an eye on them. And this is a scary development, more and more hate groups. The march in Charlottesville was anti-Semitic, which is also on the rise. When we see things like graffiti, we need to take those seriously. See, part of what sometimes you get when you hear the rhetoric from the president and others is, oh, they don't mean anything or don't take it seriously. But we can't allow that, because we know that what starts simmering, when we allow a climate of hate and bullying, it gets worse. So one is keep an eye on these groups, but also work super hard not to tolerate it in all sorts of settings that allows it to build. Let me give you an example of that someone told me about. And one of the great things about the campaign trail, and what I need desperately, when I'm Attorney General, we have to do these forums also, so people can say, here's what I'm seeing and hearing. Here's an example that I heard. They call it a game called Protect the Border, where the students who are Latino are surrounded by others. Exactly. That's not okay, and we have to not allow that sort of treatment in our schoolyards. And there's a hotline in the Attorney General's office that's meant to be collecting threats of different kinds called Safe to Tell. We want to make sure we use that to get the word out to schools and other places. You cannot allow any of this to simmer, whether it's hatred from neo-Nazi groups or others.
What can the Attorney General's office do about ICE abuses? is there anything you can do about some of these ICE detention centers that are in our state and being abused? Or about some of the Colorado citizens who have been placed there?
This is, again, one of the painful moments we're now watching. Families being broken up, inhumane treatment. Some of you remember when Giuliani was mayor of New York, there was a police beating and the police were saying it's Giuliani time. Tone gets set. That can be a tone that condones, allows, encourages bad behavior. What's a problem is the federal government has their own law enforcement agents, and if those agents act in ways that are against American values, the state attorney general can only take action when there is a law and they're acting illegally or unconstitutionally. If they're, and again, pardon this, merely acting inhumanely or against common sense, there's no legal hook to challenge their conduct. If the action is by ICE agents doing things that are inhumane or defying common sense, mean-spirited, and they're within the law, the Attorney General doesn't have any tools to use. We can, and I will, make sure that none of our law enforcement resources get sucked into any part of this. The word you often hear is sanctuary cities. I don't love that word because an undocumented immigrant has not committed a crime. It is a civil offense for which a possible remedy is deportation, as appropriate. That can give license to ICE to play lots of not so nice games with people's lives. Unfortunately, if ICE is playing the games and it's legal, there's nothing the AG can do.
Let me restate my question. If they are breaking Colorado law,
So we have something in the United States called the Supremacy Clause, which means the federal laws are supreme over state laws. If ICE's actions are within federal law, even if it would not be legal under Colorado law, we can't stop federal agents. It is a painful fact to have the federal government acting in ways. We just confirmed a CIA head, or we're about to, right, who believes in torture. Those are not the ways we believe our government should be acting, and we have to ask always, okay, is there a legal theory that we can stop them? In some cases there might be, in other cases there might not.
Just before, Simone, before we take your question, just want to say, let's take this last question for civil rights, and we do want to cover our subject areas, so after your question, Simone, we'll go into our next area.
So with the supremacy clause, there's not many legal remedies, but sometimes the pen is mightier than the sword. Are there PR remedies?
I love that question. Yes, and this is an important point, back to the hate speech one. When you get me as Attorney General, you're not only getting someone who's operating in the box with those conventional legal tools. I'm going to ask, what other tools can we use? And Simone's point is dead on. The power of convening, the power of moral, voicing and shaming, I will use those every chance I get, whether against private sector activity or public sector activity that goes against core values. So yes, I'd use other tools to call out bad behavior and seek to change it any way I could.
Okay, so I think it was a good segue to our next subject area, which is immigration. This question comes from my wife, Gonzala Hayes. The number of refugees has decreased significantly since the Trump administration has been in office. For example, the total number of Muslim refugees has dropped 94%, right? What would you do as Attorney General to support the refugees and family reunification for the ones who have come that are waiting for others?
Really important question. I should let people know, if anyone's willing to sign up, Brittany, would you be willing to help share?
Yeah.
This is a sign-up sheet for my email list. I promise you these are interesting political emails. If you're wanting to keep up, maybe folks could sign in, that would be awesome. Thank you. The questions about what has happened with respect to restricting Muslim refugees, my family came here as religious, fleeing religious persecution as refugees. It's a personal issue that I am appalled by. Many know the reason that the ban on Muslim immigrants has been limited is because state AGs from other states, not from Colorado, have stood up to the Trump administration. I would join that action, and I would look to work to loosen whatever restrictions we could. The one about keeping families apart is super high on my list. The challenge is, and I'm sorry that we're on this depressing theme, we can use our voice as effective as we can, and I will. I can look for every tool I can. Unfortunately, after the Supreme Court rules in the Muslim ban case, we will see what that legal playing field looks like and what tools state AGs will have to allow Muslim immigrants who are otherwise being restricted. This is a painful situation. I want to do everything I can to fight it, but I'm always going to be straight with you about what tools we have. And on this one, I'm not yet sure, because the Supreme Court's yet to rule, how much room we have to operate in. Not every statute has as much discretion as the immigration laws, but the immigration laws have a lot of discretion for the executive branch. That's why President Obama was able to protect the Dreamers, is he said, I'm going to use the discretion to say, I'm not going to deport any Dreamers, and made a promise based on Dreamers taking certain action. Having made that promise, I believe we can protect Dreamers and defend that promise. That's yet another litigation. I may be jumping ahead to a question. And I believe we've got good theory there that we can defend the Dreamers with. On the Muslim ban, we'll see what the Supreme Court says. That might end up being a tougher one for us to push in the right direction.
Thank you. Betty?
Okay, this one is somewhat related, but what can you do, if anything, as Attorney General to protect, you said you didn't like the term, sanctuary cities. So if the federal government wants to punish Colorado for supporting sanctuary cities, is there any action you can take as an Attorney General?
Yes, I will sue the federal government and I will beat them in court. If you want to know how cynical George Brockler is, this is what you need to know. He sent out an email today. When he sent out his emails, people didn't forward to me. Oh, look what he's saying. And he said, oh, look, this great Supreme Court decision enforcing the 10th Amendment and standing up against commandeering. This is an area of expertise of mine in federalism. And he's right. There's this principle called anti-commandeering under the 10th Amendment, that states can't be commandeered to do what the federal government wants. You know what that principle means? It means the city of Denver has every right to say, we're not going to be commandeered by the federal government. We're not going to be forced to turn over undocumented immigrants. And I will win that case every day of the week. And George Brockler will have to explain how he loves this principle of anti-commandeering, except when it comes to Denver protecting undocumented immigrants.
So we will take questions on immigration from the audience. Michael?
Just a quick follow-up. How does the anti-commandeering and the supremacy clause that you talked about, how do they play nice with each other?
I feel like I'm teaching constitutional law again with that question. It's a great question. The idea is federal law is supreme over state law. And if federal law is saying, for example, marijuana is illegal, a state can't override the federal law. However, the feds don't get to make state agents, state officials, do their bidding. If the feds want to enforce their own law, the feds have to do it themselves. They can't make the state entities do it for them. That's how the two fit together. Does that make sense?
Go ahead, Kate.
I went to a meeting where George Brockler stood at the Aurora Central High School along with Chief Metz and other people in Aurora and said how important it was that we support sanctuary cities and protect people so they'll continue to come forward with reporting crimes against their communities.
That's very interesting, because my understanding of the rhetoric of the Republican Party is to demonize sanctuary cities and demonize immigrants. Do you know if that was taped?
Yeah, it was, the city of Aurora had their own Channel 8 people
I would
there.
love, if you can help me get that on tape. And this is another way, so you guys can be super helpful. First and foremost, we need to do the best we can in winning as many votes as we can in Douglas County. You guys are going to be critical to that, number one. Number two, you guys know George Brockler, have access to him. He is, I believe, a smart and cynical politician. Cynical, meaning he will say different things at different times if he thinks it's strategically valuable. And this is one potential example.
Brockler's slick, man.
Exactly, this is the point.
I had a conversation with him on many occasions, and I usually can tell the difference. He had me eating up something, then I had to shake my hand, wait, this is George Brockler.
Right.
You have to be careful with his, he is very smooth in the way he.
Well, I'm looking forward to debating him, and what I want no BS, rigorous discussions. George Brockler gets to decide what's his view on sanctuary cities. He just has to decide he has a single view, and he's got to live with what his view is. If he believes under the anti-commandeering clause that the feds can't require us to hand over undocumented citizens, that's good. If he believes that it's actually good public policy to promote public safety to let undocumented immigrants know you can go testify in court without being hauled off to DHS, I believe that's good public policy. And you don't get to believe that, but then tell the Republican base in hushed tones, oh, hey guys, don't worry, I'm with you on immigration. I'm just saying these things get elected. That's why so many Americans are cynical about politics, and they can't believe anyone.
I will, I'll look for that, and I probably have my notes from that meeting, and so, yeah.
Any other questions on immigration from anybody? Caroline?
I just have kind of an invitation. I recently got involved with Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition.
Sure.
And they are having a fundraiser and an informative meeting on the 21st of June from 6 to 8:30 in Centennial. So I don't know if any of you are interested in going or.
It's great. It's a great group. And the other one is Rocky Mountain Immigration Action Center.
Yeah.
Immigration Action Network, I think, remain.
So, you know, I'm gonna go. I'm one of the hosts, apparently, so. Raise my hand.
All right, so I think.
Wait, there's one more
You
question.
couldn't
Oh,
see me
sure.
because I'm short.
Sure, sure.
So, we have so I'm not from this state, it's a foreign entity to me. But there's a lot of xenophobia here. And I'm curious, getting back to this idea that was stated back there about the PR move that you need to make, how are you gonna sell to the xenophobic public that protecting immigrants is the right thing to do? Because, I'm not saying you need to sell that to me, I just wanna be clear about that, but I'm saying, I get what the climate is, and there's a lot of fear-mongering. How do you address that in a way that gets people to understand, this is what we should be doing, these are human beings?
These are human beings. These are individuals who are contributing to our economy and society in productive ways. These are people who, if they are tormented, pushed out, pushed underground, it makes their lives worse, it makes our lives worse. We're not accomplishing anything. And if people are anxious about their own economic situation, we need to talk about how we address economic anxiety and not blame immigrants, because those issues are separate. And at our worst, our nation has been xenophobic or nativist. At our best, we're welcoming and we're about giving everyone opportunity. And so we have to appeal to people's better angels and do our best to do that.
I don't know how successful that will be, I think you have to make an economic argument,
I'll
which is
do both.
okay. I mean, some of these people are not good people. I don't mean immigrants, by the way. I mean the people that are, that is not what I mean.
Let me take issue with this on point. The low point of Hillary Clinton's campaign is when she said there are a basket of deplorables who are irredeemable. And let me tell you why that was a low point. Basket of deplorables was really bad, but the irredeemable is even worse. Here's what John L. Lewis said. He said in his office, a young man came with his dad, and his dad said, I was there beating you up on that march, and I'm sorry. No one is irredeemable. We can't let ourselves be quick to make that judgment, because that just reinforces these divisions. I'm committed to working hard to meet people where they are and bring people along to the best traditions of this country.
We're going to switch to another subject area. Now we're going to go into gun safety. David?
Yeah, before that, I'd just like to make a comment. I'm a retired faculty member at the University of Colorado. Phil knows very well that 100 years ago, the state of Colorado was controlled by the Ku Klux Klan. They actually cut the budget off at the university for 1 year, trying to force the president to get rid of all those damn Catholics and Jews. So Colorado's come a long way. It's got a long ways to go. So gun safety is the next title, coming from Castle Rock. We all love to carry our guns, even in the library. So what rights do schools have, or teachers at that school, who don't want to carry guns?
The judge I clerked for taught me a very important lesson. This Judge David E. Bell lives not too far from here. I'm not afraid of what I don't know. I'm afraid of what I think I know. I've not been asked that question before. And if I understand the question is a teacher in Castle Rock required to carry his or her gun?
Mike, this is more of a theoretical one. If the school wants the teacher to
Right.
carry it, what rights does that teacher have to say no and still be employed? If
Okay.
the school decides not to have it, and teachers within that school insist they want to, that's a dilemma.
The question, I guess if I can, again, rephrase it is,
Yeah.
can a school under terms of its employment tell teachers, in order to work here, you have to carry a gun? Is that one of your
Yeah, can
questions?
they do that?
I would need to study this more carefully, but off the top of my head, I think it's plausible that a school could make that a condition of employment if it decided it was actually a legitimate occupational requirement. I do think it would be crazy to decide that every teacher had to have a gun and they'd only hire teachers who had a gun, because you'd obviously be limiting the pool of teachers quite dramatically. But this is the point about the lawyer for the state is, I'm not giving people my policy guidance, right? I might say, I think you'd be crazy to do it, and if you wanted to, there's nothing to stop you.
What if the parents didn't want to do it?
Then the parents have to change the school board, which I hear you in Douglas County are good at doing. To get a new school board that was a little saner.
We'll just ask another question on gun safety, Tim, and then we'll come to
I
audience.
just had a question, what you're talking about.
Sure.
If they're already presently employed, wouldn't that be considered duress?
The question, the question that's asked is, if you're looking at currently employed people and you impose this as a new requirement, would that violate existing, let's say, maybe labor agreements? Possibly. That could be a reason to make an exception. I don't know if that would apply, probably wouldn't apply to new employees who might be required to have this. But maybe to existing employees, that would be a limitation.
Okay, sorry, Mike, I'm just going to answer one question and we'll take audience questions. On gun safety as well, we know that in 2013, right, there were some laws passed to enforce additional gun safety rules. But several sheriffs have expressed opposition to those gun safety regulations. As Attorney General, what steps would you take to make all sheriffs compliant with these state regulations?
This is an important question, and obviously you could change the issue. And dynamics are similar. You have some entity of Colorado government, so take a school board, if it's education, or a water district, if it's water, and the local entity says, oh, I'm not going to enforce Colorado law, just like the, federal supremacy, state is supreme over localities. If localities say, I'm not going to enforce the law, we have to have a conversation. And the first part of the conversation is, that is your duty to uphold and enforce the law. And if people say, a sheriff, well, I'm just not going to do it, then we've got to figure out how are we going to do it. And the extreme step would be a lawsuit from the state of Colorado against the sheriff for refusing to do their job. That would be the last ditch. You'd rather not get there. But my objective is going to say, I want the law enforced. And if a sheriff says, I won't enforce it for whatever reasons, my next question is, okay, how do we get this law enforced then? That's my goal. My goal will not be to show up the sheriff. My goal will certainly not be to end up in litigation against the sheriff. My goal is to get the law enforced. And maybe we can figure out another way to do that. There might be some other tools other than litigation. I mentioned the Peace Officer Standards and Training Program is a way to certify peace officers. That's done by the AG's office. I'm not sure if that would have any relevance here or not. But I'm committed to enforcing our common sense gun laws, and we need sheriffs to cooperate. I'm convinced to enforcing our education laws, we need school boards to cooperate. I'm convinced to enforcing our water laws and compacts, we need water conservation districts to cooperate.
Mike, did you have a question?
It was similar. I guess with regards to gun safety, and looking at our current laws, or is there anything in your mind that, should you be elected, that you would want to, in a sense, strengthen?
Yes.
Our current, such as?
Bump stock ban, red flag warning, and restrictions on assault weapons would be my top three. Here's one on assault weapons, by the way. This came from somebody suggested to me. Why not allow them only to be owned and used in gun ranges themselves, right? If you want to use an assault weapon in a gun range, that's where the gun has to stay. There's no legitimate civilian use for it. That would be one restriction. Obviously, age restrictions on purchasing weapons would be another.
Mental health.
Mental health is an important one too. Mental health is covered in part by the red flag law, which says if you're not in stable mental health, you can have your gun taken away from you. You can also have it a background check to limit access to it as well.
It was just killed.
I'm aware of that, yeah.
Let's let other people have a chance that haven't asked questions yet. Howard?
Phil, you've seen I'm sure you're aware of what the Canadian laws are. They actually have the household spouse sign off on it, which I think is a single one of the highest forms of domestic abuse, ends up into domestic violence, which ends up with, if they have a firearm in the home, it's like 80% more likely to be used. Is that something you would push for as well?
I need to think about whether that is constitutional. It's a very interesting question about giving the spouse a veto right on your ability to have a gun. I haven't thought about the constitutionality of that.
Well, is that what you're asking, or are you asking if there is already a conviction for DV, would they not be allowed to?
Oh, that's easy. That's an easy one.
No, I'm kind of asking like, that's an easy, I know Phil's take on that already.
Yeah, that's fair. If you've been, and we have, I believe in Colorado, if you're convicted of domestic violence, you should not have a weapon. Because as Howard's saying, one of the #1 sources of gun violence are domestic violence situations, and we want to prevent it. The DV conviction would help, the red flag warning would help. Howard has another one that would help, which is if you want to own a gun and you're married, your spouse has to sign off and authorize it. And
Absolutely.
I understand the logic behind it. I'm not sure that it would pass constitutional muster.
Should we be notified?
Other gun safety questions?
The notification, good suggestion, audience. A notification requirement, I think, would be constitutional.
Okay.
I hadn't heard that suggestion before.
That would save a few lives.
Yeah, there was actually a mom's and meeting the other night where there was a discussion of 3 people getting shot because a man went off his medication and bought a gun and his wife didn't know. And
So that would be notification would really help them
if
out.
she'd been notified, because she knew he was going off his meds, if she'd been notified that he bought a gun, she could have taken action. But because she didn't know, then,
It's a double flag.
Tim, did you have a question?
Yeah, one last thing, just going back to the domestic violence. Just tonight, before we left the house, on TV set, there was something saying that that law is in fact where they can confiscate the guns, but they're having problems enforcing it.
That might be similar to, was that the same one we talked about, where the sheriffs are not enforcing it? Is that?
I guess that may fall into that.
Yeah.
So my question would have been, what would you do to help make that more enforceable?
I think it's the same answer I gave to Michael earlier. You need to figure out a way either to work with the sheriff so they enforce it, or find a way to create some alternative enforcement mechanism, because it's not acceptable to allow the law to remain unenforced.
Right.
There's lives at stake.
Thank you.
And Phil, you've mentioned, one of the things that you could do is, working with the Attorney General's office, and there's 500 employees.
Yep.
Can those employees be, going out there and working with the sheriffs? or-
Yeah, so this would be one of the ways you could imagine doing it. You could say to the sheriff, and part of what we need more of in our politics is empathy. So just imagine the sheriff was going to be honest with me, which might not happen. The conversation might go like this: I'll never get elected sheriff again if I enforce this law.
Yeah.
And I say to the sheriff, okay, I want to deputize someone as a deputy sheriff to enforce this law, and they could be someone who works at the AG's office. And the sheriff might say, if you do that, I won't object. And the person might even, have some acknowledgement of that. That would be a way to solve the problem. My goal is always going to be, how do we solve the problem in Tech, Colorado? My goal is not going to be to show up the sheriff, definitely not get into long litigation, and that would be a way to do it.
Any other gun safety questions? Go ahead, sir.
Are you opposed to licensing and registering guns, and if so, why?
Well, right now, we have a system where in order to get a gun, you got to pass a background check, which is a close cousin or close to that. What would be additional part of a licensing regime, other than you got to get a background check to have a gun? What else would you put into it?
The identity of the particular gun, like which person is responsible for which individual weapons?
So once you got the gun, you would then have a database of this individual owns this gun?
Something similar to what we have with automobiles.
Yeah. I'm open to that. I've not heard that proposal developed, and how we've operationalized it. My view is always going to be on gun safety measures is A, back to Howard's point, is it constitutional? And then B, okay, can we administer it effectively? And then C, is it going to save lives? And if it's going to save lives, I'm obviously very inclined to think about how to do it. This one, there could be a case that you'll save lives by tracking guns. I don't know that it's, how to administer it all, but I'm open to thinking about it. Sure.
Okay, so, sorry, but we could have a whole town hall on gun safety. And actually, we did have one, just a few weeks ago, right? For those who can't. But we are going to move on to the environment now, and Ben.
All right. So, you're probably aware that fracking in Colorado is not only a sensitive issue, it's a very contentious issue.
Heard that.
You heard. Thought so. So in 2016, the Colorado Supreme Court upheld a state law, and this was supported by Governor Hickenlooper, that prevented local communities from banning fracking. So could you tell us whether this was the right decision and why it was the right decision? And what rights do communities, what you support communities, what rights would they have on fracking?
Let me start mostly with the latter part of the question, because the first part is in the rear view mirror, and I'm more focused on what do we do going forward. The tragedy we have right now is we have an attorney general who doesn't represent people and their communities, but she's taken it upon herself to represent the oil and gas industry. The most notable such example was filing a lawsuit against Boulder County when it was considering an ordinance to protect people and to ensure that any oil and gas drilling was safe. And the worst part here, how many lawyers do you have in the group? A few lawyers here? Okay. Graduate grade law school. We lawyers don't do this. She sued Boulder County without talking to them first. That's not a way to solve problems. That's about playing politics. And we do not want an attorney general who's a ambitious political actor trying to make an example of counties. We want one who represents the counties, works with the counties. That's what I want to do. In fact, I want to create a special unit in the Attorney General's office to represent and counsel counties as they're dealing with oil and gas companies to ensure that any oil and gas drilling in their counties respects the public health, safety, and environment. This is the front line, and what we've seen around the state is a number of communities, Broomfield, Boulder, they're developing memorandum of understanding or surface area agreements that include monitoring water, air, setback requirements, other protective measures. That's what the AG should be working with communities, not suing them. Second, under current Colorado law, we have a backstop. The Colorado Oil and Gas Commission is charged with approving any applications, permits. Our AG has also not done her job as the lawyer for the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission. Most notably, our Attorney General read out of the statute that oil and gas drilling permits can be denied if they hurt the public safety, health, or welfare. That is now at the Supreme Court. It's the Martinez case. And our Attorney General has gone against the wishes of our governor and has gone against sound law and policy. I believe she will be rebuked. I believe the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission has that authority. But we'll have all this litigation because our Attorney General is not working to implement the laws in a way to protect people. Can our current system of oil and gas law operate effectively, the combination of local authority and state authority? I believe it can. I work hard to enforce our laws, ensure that people are protected. The question about even if you can't ban oil and gas development, what can you do? That's quite a bit. And a number of communities are doing quite a few things to ensure that people are protected. I want to work to help develop best practice counsel and support those communities. And that's the type of leadership I bring to the Attorney General's office.
So the next question is, sorry. This administration has launched a well-publicized and unapologetic attack on national monuments in neighboring Utah, with rumors that there are more to come. What would you do to ensure that the Colorado national monuments and other beautiful public lands in Colorado are protected from such attacks?
I'd fight them. The Antiquities Act is very clear. The president has the right to designate national monuments, not the right to take them back. I'd also fight oil and gas drilling in the sand dunes, which is currently on the table.
How do you fight those things?
In court. And this is really important. The federal courts are still the one branch of our government that's working. And again, the EPA, the Department of Education, the Department of Interior has been checked by state AGs filing lawsuits saying you've acted against the rule of law. I would use our courts, I would use the rule of law to check lots of behavior that would undermine our environment, would take back valuable national park lands. Got to keep our national parks public.
So we'll take questions from the, or did you have a follow-up?
Well, I was just going to follow up by one person submitted, Kate Barrett submitted a question to us to ask the candidates, and that would be, how would you use your office and position to ensure that environmental protection and laws are not repealed at the federal level? And that's kind of tough because you have no influence over federal law being generated. But what
Well,
kind
this
of
is a good version of what Howard said, and this is an important point, by the way. You're going to talk to people who are going to say, oh, shouldn't we elect George Brockler Attorney General because he's a district attorney, and that's what the AG does. And the answer is, hell no. There's 9 divisions in the AG's office, only one of which is the criminal division. The environmental division, dealing with issues like our land, air, and water, is crucially important. And we have a big voice in Washington and a big ability to check illegal behavior under a law called the Administrative Procedure Act, which means when Scott Pruitt does something at the EPA, if his action is arbitrary and capricious, we can turn it around in the courts. And we've done that. When Scott Pruitt tried to get rid of the methane rule that we adopted here in Colorado, and the EPA followed suit. Our governor said, we gotta protect this. Our attorney general refused to do it. Our governor got private counsel, joined other state AGs. The other state AGs won, and Scott Pruitt was held to have broke the law by trying to get rid of this important protection in a way that was arbitrary and capricious. So we do have an ability to stop regulatory decision-making through this important law, the Administrative Procedure Act. I would use that law, Administrative Procedure Act, to fight against the repeal of network neutrality, which is another bad decision we've seen from the FCC, or to fight against protections for student borrowers at the Department of Education. A lot of these decisions are being made in ways that are irrational, don't have any reason basis behind them, and they are not being held up in court. I would challenge them in court.
Question? Simone, you have a question on environment?
So, I'm kind of trying to use your cheat on my homework with this one, because it's really hard to Google and hoping to know. So, there's differences between reparative damages and punitive damages, and when companies do damages to local communities, which ones are we doing? Are we trying to, it's like the McDonald's coffee thing, is it, how is that much money for Burns? But the point was to make McDonald's never do that again by making it hurt. What kind of damages are we seeking when we do seek, and are we getting them?
In order to seek punitive damages, with one exception I'll get to in a minute, you generally have to show that the action was willful. If a company does something that is wrong and they do it willfully, they are on the hook for punitive damages. There's one very important case that's now pending that I would join, where there's this question raised. It involves pharmaceutical companies who've pushed out opioids, encouraged them to be prescribed for lengths of time that they knew were going to lead to people becoming dependent on it. It was misrepresenting what would happen, made a bunch of money, and now need to be held accountable. If this case is fully litigated, the question of punitive damages will be one that would end up having to be decided. I actually think that case will get settled probably, and I'd rather settle it because I don't want to wait so long to get the money. But we get the money from winning that case against the pharmaceutical companies, we can then use it to create drug treatment options in parts of our state that don't have any. And when I went to the Alamos County Jail, I heard from the sheriff there, 90% of people in that jail are opioid users. 90%. And there's no drug treatment around. Once we win this case, I'm going to work on how do we get drug treatment in southern Colorado, where we don't have any right now. As for, just regular damages that heal the harm, that's where someone does something and they didn't do it on purpose, it wasn't willful, it might have been negligent, and we say, we still did something wrong, we need you to fix it. And that's an important principle that we will also seek to address. The one exception I mentioned earlier, antitrust law, if you do something that violates the antitrust laws, there's something called treble damages for an antitrust law violation.
But within, for our environmental cases, when like Firestone, when people do things that endanger public safety, do you know if we're going after storage if we're candidate there?
You have to be able to show that the company acted willfully. So it's a high hurdle to get punitive damages. I don't know the details in the Firestone situation. If it is quote-unquote merely negligent behavior, you wouldn't be able to get punitive damages.
Any other questions on environment? Yes, sir.
So, back at the state assembly, you were approached with a petition for 1,000-foot setbacks in regards to oil and gas companies. And at the time, you told the person you couldn't sign it because you weren't fully aware or fully informed of the information. Now, a month later, I'm assuming you've done your research. What is your stance on 1,000-foot setbacks?
So, just to be clear, I believe the petition is for 2,500-foot setbacks.
Okay.
It is. So that's
apologies. 2,500.
There could be another petition out there that I hadn't heard about. So
It is the 2,500. I apologize.
Yeah, and I have looked at it, and here's my conclusion.
Okay.
A 2,500 categorical setback requirement would be what I call over-inclusive. It would seek to put up this requirement, and it would get in the way of some of the negotiation I talked about earlier. So if you are Boulder County, you have to talk to the oil and gas company and say, what type of setback should you have? There's currently some wells operating in Boulder County right now, and existing wells this wouldn't be affected by. If we had the setback requirement, those existing wells, no matter if they were more dirty or more noisy, they're staying there for a very long time.
Okay.
Because you couldn't retire them and replace them. I want a system where you can have a company come in and say, we're willing to retire existing wells, replace them, and show the ones that we're replacing them are safer, are less noisy. This setback requirement wouldn't allow that, so I'm not for it.
Okay.
Thanks for asking.
One more question, and we'll go to the next subject area.
Do you think the Attorney General has a role in being sure that Colorado meets or exceeds the Paris climate agreements?
Yes.
And could you elaborate?
Yes, I
Because
could.
I'm not quite clear, if you're not in support of ballot issue 97, how that might ever come to pass.
Which is ballot issue 97?
What you're just
Oh.
talking about.
Well, a setback requirement in the Paris Climate Accords, I view is quite different. Let me talk about the Paris Climate Accords. First and foremost, we have something in this country that President Obama adopted called the Clean Power Plan. The Clean Power Plan goes back to litigation by state AGs, including Massachusetts State AG, who sued the EPA saying carbon is harmful to human health and has to be regulated by the EPA. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of Massachusetts. That ruling leads to the Clean Power Plan as a way to restrain carbon. Right now, Scott Pruitt is trying to get rid of the Clean Power Plan. A number of state AGs are suing, saying not so fast. This is a response to a prior Supreme Court ruling. I would join those state AGs to defend the Clean Power Plan and defend our commitment to the Paris Climate Accords. Number two, I would work here in Colorado, because I don't only want to be stopping bad stuff from happening, I want to be making progress too. We need to move towards a 21st century clean energy economy, including things like electric charging vehicles throughout the whole state. Thinking about how we move our electricity system to more use of renewables. The lawyers for the Colorado Public Utilities Commission are all in the state AG's office. I want to challenge them, work with them on these important problem-solving efforts, and work with our governor, our legislature to move us ahead. Colorado's committed to the Paris Climate Accords, even if the United States of America is not.
Would you be willing to give the COGCC some of your scrutiny if you were elected?
I would be the lawyer for them, and I would be giving them...
The lawyer for them?
Yes, the lawyer for the COGCC. Which means when the COGC has questions about how they implement the law, they're getting guidance from the Attorney General. Right now, the guidance they're getting, I mentioned the Martinez case, is bad guidance. I would change that. And I'm open to other ideas too, on how to address climate change, because our kids are not going to forgive us for not acting more sooner.
Well, that was a very surprising answer. It's commonly understood that the COGCC is somewhat of a pliable tool of the oil and gas industry, and might need a little direction to get more back into a balanced role of protecting public health as well as fomenting.
That's the guidance I give them.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
all right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, great questions, by the way, so thank you. We're going to move on to education, and just a quick footnote about time. The latest updates, we were going to, it wasn't 2 hours, we want to do maybe something a little hour or a little bit after, right, just to respect people's, time as far as, getting home and a somewhat decent answer. So we're going to move on to education. In 2015, the Colorado Supreme Court struck down a voucher program in the case Taxpayers for Public Education versus Douglas County School District. Right? Concluding that the school district's programs violated the state constitution provision against public money going to schools, in quotes, controlled by any church or sectarian denomination whatsoever. Do you agree or disagree with this decision, and why?
I agree with the decision, and it's a powerful example of why you need an AG who's an engaged leader, who's going to bring leadership and legal experience. What happened in our AG's office during this litigation to use a Lost in Space metaphor, is danger, O Robinson, danger. The office was asleep at the switch. The office defended Douglas County all the way up to the Supreme Court. It didn't take a rocket science to see this was unconstitutional, but our AG was asleep at the switch. And this is a problem with government and the AG's office, is often if you let things be on autopilot, you can tolerate lots of bad or suboptimal outcomes because no one is there awake saying, wait a minute, what's the right answer here? And that's what should have been happening there.
So many of the charter schools are not supporting special needs for children at public schools here in Colorado. As an AG, what mechanism will you use to force charter schools to comply with the same laws as the public institutions?
There are a few different issues, and this is again part of the, I need you even more after I'm elected. I won't get elected without your help, but even afterwards, because you're gonna have access to information. I was in Colorado Springs recently discussion, and I mentioned one of the problems with charter schools, that some of the charter schools, you get a shell, a nonprofit, who then contracts out a private company. And the private company doesn't operate the school for benefits of the students. They're busy taking money off the table. And I had someone say, wait a minute, I'm in a charter school, and that's happening to us right now. So I want to make sure we talk to charter schools and say, don't let this happen to you. A, we'll try to police it, but B, we want to help you make sure that you're operating appropriately. Again, because there are a couple ways you can approach it. One is counseling, which is, here's what the law is, we need you to follow the law. Then there's enforcement after the fact. I've been trying to get the answer on exactly what is the enforcement apparatus to address when schools, charter schools, are not operating the way they're supposed to be. So one way they're supposed to be is, they're supposed to actually be non-profit organizations. They're not supposed to be profit organizations. So that sham thing I mentioned is a problem. We have to figure out how to address that. Number two, they have to be transparent about what's happening. And number three, they have to accept students on a come one, come all basis, not discriminate against certain special needs students. And I've heard, or minorities or anyone else, I've heard concerns about all three of those fronts. It might be up to the local school district to engage in both the counseling and enforcement. So I'd be in a situation of going to school boards and saying, how do we make sure we enforce this and we don't have these problems cropping up?
So there are a number of exemptions that have been given to charter schools, provided that they do certain things.
Yeah.
And we find that they are using the exemptions, but not doing the provided.
Right.
Are you prepared to deal with that in the AG's office to make sure that that the charter schools either abide by the provisions or surrender those exemptions?
I am. The challenge that I need to get to the bottom of, and if any people here are willing to help me figure this out, I'd love it. Who does actually enforce those requirements? I'm not sure the Attorney General's office, as such, has that authority. It might be that the local school boards have that authority, in which case I would be a partner with them, but they would need to be the one taking the action. Does that make sense?
No, because this was a law that they passed in the state legislature, so it's at the same level as the Attorney General.
Yeah, but not every state law is enforced at the state level. Some are enforced by local entities.
Well, I understand.
Okay.
But if they can make a law that contains exemptions at the state legislature, then shouldn't there be a way of ensuring that those exemptions are followed at the same level as the law was made?
Well, not necessarily. It is plausible to me that we allow some state laws to be enforced at local level. So we have the example of the gun laws, which are enforced by county sheriffs. But then you get the problem that Michael asked, what if they're not actually enforcing it? What do? You have to work through the problem and try to get it enforced. And if you ultimately conclude that the unit that is charged with enforcement isn't doing their job, we could pass a new law, and we could have a new enforcement mechanism, which could be the Attorney General's office.
Could we do a complaint-based thing? Because one of the things that I did mention earlier was, if your local area isn't enforcing, shouldn't there be some means of escalation?
It's a great.
That's what I'm asking.
So like, there's like 7 charter schools in the state, I think, that use those ERPOs. And some way to file a complaint against, because instead of just saying, when we talk about something big and fuzzy, like all of them, it's everything's all cotton candy, but you say, this school right here is
Yes.
using an ERPO, this one right here is doing a for-profit thing.
Right.
I think you can get more action and more.
And back to our earlier conversation, even if I can't get the school board to work with me to do enforcement, if I can call bullshit on, pardon my French, on a, entity,
We're about to.
yeah, then I will work to do that.
Okay, I think we're gonna move on to another subject area, and I think this probably should be our last one, right? And so it's gonna be consumer rights, and Betty?
This is kind of broad, but the AG is expected to represent the interests of people as consumers. So as an Attorney General, what would this statement mean to you? And can you give us an example of how you would take an active role in investigating and prosecuting consumer fraud claims?
This is very important to me. I've spent a lot of my career in consumer protection, antitrust enforcement, and more consumers feel the deck is being stacked against them. We have more concentration in our economy than ever before, and consumers are often at a huge disadvantage, sometimes because they sign arbitration agreements that if something goes wrong, they're subject to then being arbitration, then there's a settlement, it's confidential. A particularly painful example of this is Wells Fargo, which opened up fake bank accounts for people, charged them, fired the employees who blew the whistle, and put a black mark on their record. Then they had these arbitration deals that kept them silent when people actually complained. It wasn't until the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau blew the whistle on this practice and addressed it. Well, what's happening to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau now? It's gone. Nick Mulvaney shutting it down, which means state AGs have to pick up that slack on cases like Wells Fargo. Think about the antitrust issues. We've had too many mergers in airlines, and prices have gone up. And the way we know that powerfully, I think it was 2015 or 2016, the fuel prices went down big time. What happened to airline prices? Stayed the same. That doesn't happen in a competitive sector. We need to fight against undue concentration and protect consumers, and I would do that as Attorney General.
One of my pet peeves, I have many, is that under Republican presidents, the retail gasoline prices go up. Under Democratic presidents, at least in the last 20 years, they go down. We had $4 plus excessive gas prices under George W. Bush. Gas prices are going up under Trump for a variety of reasons. What can the state AG do about collusion, antitrust among the oil companies to protect the citizens of Colorado from undue gasoline prices? As an example.
Yeah, it's a good example. So antitrust laws have a few elements. One is the merger control to prevent anti-competitive mergers. A second one is monopolization. So you remember the Microsoft case where they excluded Netscape as a rival. That's a second type of problem. Standard Oil was another example of that. And then third, if you get firms that are rivals agreeing with each other on price setting, for example, or staying in separate territories, that is illegal under the antitrust laws and gives rise to treble damages. I would go after such cases as Attorney General.
And you can do so as a state AG?
Yeah, this is really important. The state AG has independent authority, independent from the governor, independent from the federal government, to enforce both state and in many cases federal laws, including the law underlying the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. That gives state AGs authority, including the federal antitrust laws. That gives state AGs authority. I would use that authority as Attorney General.
Great, thank you, Phil. On consumer rights, I see we have some young people here. Unfortunately, student debt is a big problem for many young people graduating from college. Many of these students are taken advantage of through predatory debt, right? What actions do you plan to take to address this?
I've got a blog post on this. It's a really important point. And just this week, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau shut down its unit protecting student borrowers. So it's a bad week. And earlier, Betsy DeVos got rid of a rule that said if you were a student borrower at a for-profit college and you got stuck in debt without skills, the debt belonged to the for-profit college, not you. Betsy DeVos got rid of that rule. That's being challenged on an appeal. I would fight hard to protect students. First, I should say, when I was dean of the law school, we lowered average indebtedness by $16,000 per student. This is really important. We have a huge crisis in this country. Total student indebtedness is now $1.5 trillion. And students get now all these scams where people say, oh, we'll try to help restructure your debt, and it's BS, and they're actually making it worse off. We have to go after those bad actors. There's a case involving Navient that was brought by the Pennsylvania State AG, Josh Shapiro. I would join that sort of case. This is a really important issue, and we need to look at it from all the angles I mentioned, the for-profit education angle, the student debt service angle. We need to be protecting student borrowers with whatever tools we can.
So we're going to finish it off with a final question, and then we'll give people an opportunity to talk to Phil.
So Phil, assuming you're going to be elected, what would be your top priority, and what is the first law in Colorado you would change if you could?
Take the second one first. The first law I will work to change / pass, and the AG can actually introduce his or her own laws, but I'd work with members of the legislature. This one, State Senator Rachel Zenziger, when she's in the majority, will work together on this. It's called the Disclose Act. They passed it in Montana. It says, if you want to spend in Colorado elections, you have to disclose all your donors. Montana passed that law. What Steve Bullock said is they don't have dark money in their elections. As I mentioned, the playbook for the Republicans is the Republican Attorney General's Association, which is going to spend $5 million, much of which will be dark money. We're not going to know who it's coming from. I want this to be the last election where that happens. And I want to pass this law.
And then the top priorities.
This law would be a top priority, but so would protecting our democracy and our constitutional rights. And right now we're in a moment where our Constitution and our democracy is on the line. And Congress is not doing its job. Separation of powers is not working because Congress, and this is the #1 word of 2017, has been complicit. Whether it's the Muslim ban we talked about, whether it's the Dreamers, whether it's the census, putting a question asking if you're a citizen or an immigrant. This is wrong. This is departing from our constitutional heritage, and even where Congress is not doing its job, state AGs are. I would be a leader and get Colorado on the right side of defending our democracy and our Constitution at a time when we need citizens rising up to do just that.
So have you thought about running for Congress? I mean, making a law, putting a check on this administration?
We need state AGs defending our Constitution, defending our democracy. That's the job I really want to do. We need state AGs defending consumers and fighting for opportunity for people, whether it's people in the grips of the opioid epidemic or people who are living in places that don't have broadband. And we need our state AG defending our land, air, and water and fighting climate change. There's a lot I can do as your Attorney General. That's the job I want.
I see that's where your passion is.
I would like to make a point real quickly that one good thing about being an AG and one of these state officials is that you don't have an electorate to be pandering to. You're actually doing a lot of state work behind the scenes and doing a lot of things. This is why we need all to get these state elections won. It's super, super urgent because when you represent, say, a congressional district, you actually have to represent people that don't agree with you. To your point about Phil running for Congress, Phil in the AG's office doesn't have to worry about that. So there are some advantages of doing it. Now, again, you can't fall asleep on the wheel like Kaufman has, by just being lazy and clicking off, when crisis hits. And that's the key difference. So when you do Congress, you're actually you're still representing electorate. When he goes into AG office, or if it's Joe or is the Democrat, please represents the AG's office. We now have someone that works for the law of Colorado. So we have to think about that, and that's why it's so important that we turn out for these elections as well.
I would still want a Democrat.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm just saying the difference kind of is you can actually, you're working for the law rather than working for the people.
So Phil, one of the suggestions I have with your law, like NASCAR, make them carry a coat with a badge that defines who bought it.
Well, if you get disclosure, then
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, but it's more apparent.
She had
a question.
I think I had a question. Well, I'll take the last question here, and then we'll give Phil a chance to make a final statement.
Oh, okay, I did, Phil. May I address you as Phil?
I want you all to address me as
Before
Phil.
you're called
Always.
AG
No,
Weiser.
I just want to be called Phil. When I was dean at CU Law, I would tell people, please call me Phil, or if you must, Dean Weiser. If you're not comfortable with either, then call me Coach. So if you're not comfortable with Phil, call me Coach.
I'm a little late to this party, just kind of hitting the ground running. It's a twofold question. First of all, is there any organization that you would refuse campaign donations from?
The NRA.
Would that also include the Rocky Mountain Thunder?
Absolutely.
Aren't they worse?
All right.
Yes, locally they are.
They're a pretty scary bunch of people. And secondly, okay, you answered that first one correctly, by the way. Secondly, A, how old are you? And B,
We're doing a dating game.
what was the one thing, I'm married. What was the one thing, if you could narrow it down, that drove you to run for AG? So, how old are you, and, that proverbial straw that just lit a fire under you?
And let me use this last one to do my closing statement. I'm 50 years old. I just turned 50.
Oh, well played.
Happy birthday.
And the TV ad that will come out this weekend-ish, you'll see it on digital, then we'll get it on TV, starts with election night 2016. And the ad is a metaphor, so it's not all literally true, but it's all directionally correct. And what happened election night is my wife had said to me, Phil, you need to run for Attorney General, because if good people don't run for office, then we get the Trumps. I had told my wife years ago, my life has been dedicated to public service, and I've always looked to find a way to serve and to help people. I've also always known, as an abstract matter, that you can't just wait to be appointed to serve. You have to be one to put yourself forward and run for office.
Absolutely.
I had also told my wife, the one job, back to your other question, that I would love to do is not Congress. God bless those who were willing to do it. I would love to be Attorney General of Colorado, because, as Howard was saying, it is a law job. It's about using the law as a force for good, representing the people of Colorado. You couldn't get a better client. And it's a leadership job. It's also 500 people who need direction, inspiration, because now they're being led to play political games, and it's by, absentee landlord. There's an incredible chance to make a difference. It took an exceptional set of circumstances to get me, all right, ready to take this leap. And I will tell you, I remember the moment I actually announced. It was May 10th, that was actually my 49th birthday. I filed my papers, and I did feel like I was looking out over an abyss. Deciding to run for office is like jumping out of an airplane. Like, I've never done that before, but I can imagine that's what it would be like. You don't know what's going to happen, and you assume that there's going to be a parachute that's going to help you, and in my case, there has been. It's been all of you. What I have found all across the state are people who are saying, thank you for doing this. With the exact same spirit that people here said, we're in a scary moment for our democracy right now. And if we get more cynical politicians who, fan hatred, who give duplicitous answers, who don't truly try to solve problems and don't defend our core values, our country's going to be in decline. And we can't allow that to happen, and that's why I'm running for your Attorney General. Thank you all.